WEWS.
The Overnight Underground Podcast. Here's the headlines. Trump talks opening up.
Relax. We're doing great. It all will pass.
Lockdown making Americans loony.
I'm nuts.
Unemployment jumps. Mass transit breeds the virus, and stimulus checks spur some wacky purchases. These stories and more coming up on today's Overnight Underground News. I'm John Ford. The president says coronavirus infection has, quote, passed its peak in the U.S., even though the virus has to date officially infected over 600,000 people, and new deaths from coronavirus increased by a record amount for the second straight day, rising to nearly 2,400.
It is clear that our aggressive strategy is working, and new cases are declining throughout the New York metropolitan area. Cases in the Detroit and Denver metro areas are flat. Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, and St. Louis are showing great signs of progress, and new cases in Houston and New Orleans are declining. The battle continues, but the data suggests that nationwide we have passed the peak on new cases.
So does this make Trump a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of guy? Because we already know he's half cocked and half witted. Mr. Trump also announced that new measures for opening up the country for business would be announced today, after he has talked to the governors. To say the lockdown is driving Americans loopy would be an understatement. The sounds of a rally in Michigan with angry citizens demanding that the governor open back up the state.
It's time for our state to be opened up. We're tired of not being able to buy the things that we need, go to the hairdressers, get our hair done. It's time to open up.
God forbid that those Michiganders can't get their hair done. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
This rally endangered people. This kind of activity will put more people at risk. And sadly, it could prolong the amount of time we have to be in this posture.
Meanwhile, the protesters taking part in Operation Gridlock chanted the now familiar "Lock her up" in response to the governor's stay-at-home order. Protesters also erupted during the Kentucky governor's press conference in Frankfort yesterday, and there were protests in Virginia's capital of Richmond. But why so loopy? Well, this might have something to do with it. In the last week, another 5 million people lost their jobs. This brings the grand total to just under 22 million who have lost their employment in a month. This has got to be the quote of the day from the economist Jay Bryson to NBC News. Quote, "The labor market is showing us what I think we all know, that the economy is falling off a cliff at an unprecedented rate." Well, what did you expect to happen when the government essentially makes it illegal to work? No worries, though. Everything will be back to normal by Easter. The question remains, Easter of which year? Unfortunately, the next wave of job losses may hit white-collar jobs that many believed were, quote, safe from the coronavirus job loss nightmare. 7 San Diego reports that at least one economics expert believes that many of the allegedly safe work-at-home white-collar jobs could get hit with layoffs, and soon.
There's a worry, though, that as the economy slows, that this will spread into other areas, including white-collar jobs. For there to be work, companies need to sell products and services. And so if the whole economy is grinding to a halt, then even if you could do your job at home, there might not be, any business.
Economics professor Rick Alan Jin from the University of San Diego. Funeral directors and gravediggers, though, should have pretty good job security. Well, this should shock absolutely no one. The New York Post reports that according to an MIT study, subways are a major disseminator of coronavirus in the Big Apple. The report highlights a parallel between high ridership and the rapid exponential surge in infections during the first 2 weeks in March. Take 5 million people riding daily in enclosed structures inside of tubes, with everyone touching slimy metal poles and squeaky plastic seats. What's the problem? And here we've been worrying about man-spreading all these years. In Flint, Michigan, multiple felony charges are in order for an idiot who assaulted a 91-year-old man in his hospital room with an IV pole. The man later died. The altercation took place at Hurley Medical Center when a 25-year-old man, who was staying in the same room, hit the elderly man with the IV pole and then stabbed him in the eye with the IV catheter. Flint, Michigan. There must be something in the water there. Here's a feel-good story of the day. Mazda will give healthcare workers a free oil change and car wash. even if they don't drive a Mazda. Jalopnik is reporting that the service, called the Essential Car Care Initiative, has earmarked a minimum of $5 million for the program. The first stimulus checks are making it to Merkins, and what are they spending the emergency money on? Well, if you pay attention to social media, and I'm not saying you should, dildos, guns, and stripper poles seem to be the popular items selling now that the Merkins have gotten their infected little fingers on the cash.
Shoot, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Vegas with all that stuff.
Maybe if Vegas wasn't closed for business. The New York Post reports that other recipients' purchases included paintball supplies, stuffed animals, and an inflatable dinosaur costume. I'm a little disappointed that booze and hookers didn't make the list.
N-E-W-S.
A mostly correct and occasionally incomplete transcript and links to reference sources and articles of this Overnight Underground can be found at overnightundderground.com.